Hey MW, I'm Melissa.
And I'm Stephanie Carcache, and we are two sisters and the founders of Millennial Women.
And your host of Millennial Women Talk, the podcast. We are so grateful you're sharing your time with us today. In today's episode of Millennial Women Talk, we discuss pet loss and grief with the help of our dear friend, writer, and mental wellness content creator, Vivian Nunez. After I lost my pup, Romeo, after 15 years, a month and a half ago, I struggled with the feelings of overwhelming grief and shame to admit it.
On this episode, we learn that grief looks different for everyone. We also learn how to manage all the different emotions grief can bring on, even through the loss of a pet, and how to not be afraid of facing grief at one point in your life. There are so many vulnerable and insightful moments on this episode. Here is our full conversation with Vivian Nunez. Hey, Mel.
Hello.
So I know you've been really wanting to do this episode for a while. It's something that you've been dealing with in this season of your life.
Yes. I'm actually very nervous about this particular episode because I feel like I've never been this vulnerable on the show. So I'm a little bit nervous.
Don't be nervous. You are with me and also, with our listeners, which is our beautiful community.
Yeah. And I'm excited to bring in Vivian, who's a dear friend of ours, to come in because I feel like she's going to give me, I already want to cry. She's going to give me a lot of comfort.
Yes. So don't cry already.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you know what? Cry, actually. It's normal. I think what you've been going through is something that everybody's going to have to go through at one point or the other. So I'm just so proud of you for wanting to be open, and kind of share your experience. So if you don't mind sharing now.
Yeah. So in today's episode, as our viewers are going to hear and watch, I think it's important for us to talk about grief. For this particular episode's surrounded around pet loss grief. So I lost my dog Romeo about a month and a half ago. Mm-hmm. But I do want to talk about how he came into my life because it was very unique.
And you never wanted a dog.
You were the dog person.
I was always the dog person. So it's like, it was kind of shocking that you wanted a dog.
I know. So it's funny, when I was about 18 years old, I had just met my now fiance, Jose, and we just started dating. And all of a sudden, I'll never forget this day, we were walking towards the parking lot of the school. We were leaving, it was the end of the school day. And I said to him, I really want a dog. And he was like, you want a dog? I was like, yeah, I really want a dog. And I want it to be a Chihuahua. And I want to have a dog. And so we went on this process of finding this dog. And a friend of ours got hers in Homestead, Florida, in a breeder. And so I called her up and I said, do you have any puppies? And she was like, no, my litter, she just had puppies, all the puppies, she had 4 puppies, they're all gone, they're all sold, so you have to wait for the next one. And I said, oh, okay. 2 weeks later, she calls me and she was like, listen, out of, she had 3, I'm counting 4. She had 3 girls and a boy. She's like, no one has claimed the boy. I'm calling the guy that was going to buy him. Right. And he's not answering. Do you want to come and see him? And I said, yes. So I lied to mom because our mom doesn't like dogs.
At all.
So I lied to her and told her I was going to go to the mall with Janelle, my friend Janelle. Yeah. And I lied to her and I went to go see this dog. And she brought him out and he was so cute. He was literally the size of my palm of my hand, eyes closed. He was all brown. I remember I told you he looked like Bambi, Paris Hilton's Chihuahua she had. And I was in love with him instantly. I said, this is my dog. And I just knew I had a connection to him instantly. And then we traveled to Los Angeles together. We moved away together. I knew nobody. I was by myself and it was just me and him. And just he was in my life for 15 years.
Yeah, that's
which is crazy. And then you got Donatella, which they bonded together. We had 2 dogs together and it was really nice.
Yeah. And it was amazing how he came into your life, but also how he spent his life with you. Because 15 years is a long, long time. Yeah. And you went through so many different chapters in your life. And this dog was right there with you.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember when I faced depression for the first time, I was 20, 21 years old. And he was with me throughout that whole journey. And then moving back to Miami from Los Angeles and going through that, trying to recover from, this deep depression that I was in. And you were really the only person that knew. And obviously Romeo, and my dog.
Yeah.
And he helped me through that, and even when Jose and I have been together for the same amount of time, now 16 years together. And our dream was always to have a home together with him. And we were able to accomplish that.
You did.
And that was very, very special for me.
Yeah.
he was also there for, I forgot to say, he was also there for my engagement. So Jose proposed
That's
last
right.
year, May 2020, in our house during the middle of a pandemic. And, he videotaped it and Romeo was there. And that was very special for me because I really wanted him to be a part of that. So,
yeah. And so I want you to talk a little bit about sort of this relationship, the bond. Obviously you're bonded because he was always there with you. But sometimes when people look at animals, right, they kind of don't understand the relationship that you can have with an animal. And so I would love for you to speak on that because I've never seen someone bond with an animal. Like you did with Romeo.
It was a spiritual connection.
Yeah.
I can't even explain it. It wasn't that I saw him as a human or that I saw him as an animal. It was just this energy that we connected. Like he knew everything about me. I knew everything about him. Every little thing that I was wrong with him, I picked it up instantly.
Right.
And I, he was born with a heart condition and like a leaking valve and all these other things. And we knew that eventually as he got older, we would have to be on medication and he would be on a journey.
Right.
And, as a pet owner, you always feel like your animals and even the people around you live on forever.
Right.
And so last year during the pandemic, in April, we noticed that he was struggling a little bit. And the first sign of like a heart failure is this cough. They have like this honking sound cough.
Yes.
And he started to do that. So I already kind of knew that, okay, we have to take him in and see what's going on. And that's when we started the medication. And once you start that, it's about 6 months to a year of life. He made it to the year, which I was very happy about. But my biggest fear was putting him down. I didn't want to go through that. I've heard.
You didn't want to make that decision.
Well, it's just like for any pet owners had to do that. It's just trauma. I feel like it's traumatizing, right? Like I didn't want to do that. So I fought tooth and nail to like keep him as comfortable as possible. And he did. Like he was really comfortable towards the end. It got very hard. He was drinking like 7 or 8 pills a day.
Yes.
Like 7 in the morning, 4 in the evening.
That was hard.
Days he wouldn't want to take them. I would get frustrated because I was like, please, like if you don't take this, like you're going to die. And I was just always afraid. Like I had so much fear and anxiety and it's like bringing it back to me now. I'm like feeling the anxiety now because it's like, I didn't know what to expect. Like fear is so debilitating because you don't know what to expect. And that's essentially what anxiety is, right? It's like, the fear of the unknown. And I was like, what's it going to be? Is he going to die at home? I have to make that decision.
Right.
And so when it got like really close to it, like I already kind of knew, and it was actually on your birthday. And I had so much anxiety that day, remember?
I do remember.
And I remember going home and Jose saying like, he's not doing well. And he was just like, I want to use the Spanish words, but it was tirado. Like he was just laying there. He didn't want to get up. His breathing was already weird. And then that Tuesday, that was on a Sunday, that Tuesday, that Monday I took him into the doctor. And then the doctor just told me like, he's already in kidney failure. Like, this is it. So I said, okay, what do we have to do? And they were like, they knew how important. So this is why I give a big shout out to Florida vet cardiology. Dr. Proshek was like my everything. Cause I've never met a vet that literally like, I don't know, stood by my side that entire time and never felt like he's dying. So just let's put him to sleep and forget it. No, he tried to the very end. So he said, listen, let's just put some fluids and we'll send him home so that he could be with you. But we knew. I had the appointment just in case to put him down that Tuesday afternoon because we didn't want him to suffer. But throughout that whole Tuesday, I woke up with him. We went to the balcony, which is what he loved, and then the process began. But I'm just so grateful that the doctor was with us on the phone all day. So that way we made sure he wasn't suffering. And then when you guys got there.
Yeah, that's when he
left.
When he left.
But it meant a lot to me because you guys got there and he saw you guys. And then,
I know.
And that was it.
Yeah. And that's the thing with death, because it's like, you're saying like the fear of the unknown, right? But if it is something that we do know is that we will experience grief, right? At one point or another. And death is the known. Like out of all the unknowns, we do know that death is the known. And, I also know like your pain and how also you struggled with, you accepted it at the end. I remember being like, wow, Mel was so strong. She like accepted it. You accepted it. I think you also dealt a little bit with and correct me if I'm wrong, but a little bit of like shame or guilt because you were grieving the loss of a pet. So can you talk a little bit about that to our listeners? Because I think that could really be so helpful for people.
I think it can be embarrassing for someone to be like this, how I feel, and it be about an animal, right? Because it's almost like, well, you're supposed to feel that about a parent or a grandparent or a sibling or somebody very like a human being, not necessarily an animal, right? But it's like what I mentioned earlier, like it wasn't an animal or a human. It was an energy, a spirit that was very strong and that I felt was there for me throughout a lot of big moments in my life. As are humans. Humans are there for you too, like in big moments of your life. And so I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame with that because I didn't know how to express myself. And that's why I was nervous to do this episode too, because I was just like, I kind of feel a little bit embarrassed.
But you shouldn't, because, sometimes when we feel embarrassed about something, it's like, we isolate ourselves. You isolate yourself that you are the only one going through this experience, which is why you are embarrassed. And then it takes you to open up to then realize that all of a sudden, like so many people can resonate and relate. Yeah. And so you shouldn't feel embarrassed at all. You should actually feel brave because, by doing this episode, somebody right now is listening and being like, wow, I can relate to that.
Well, I got so many messages after sharing like his story. And then that's when I came up with the idea saying maybe we should talk about this on the podcast and see if this would help someone.
I would absolutely love to bring in a special friend of ours.
Yeah, somebody very close to us that, I mean, I love and respect so much.
Yes. And she's absolutely been amazing for her own community and our community who have been dealing with grief. She's a person that we turn to when we need some advice in how to deal with this. And so I would love to take this opportunity to welcome her into our show right now. Vivian Nunez. How are you doing, Vivian? Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my God, of course. I'm like in tears already having heard like the first half of this conversation.
I know.
Yeah. It's tough, right? Because I feel like for me, I have my moments, right? Grief is so interesting. And you and I've talked about it a little bit offline, but it's like, it's a unique journey I've never felt. And I've lost my grandparents. I lost my grandmother back in December. But it's a different grief. And because it was different, meaning that Romeo's loss was harder on me than my grandmother's, I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment because you would think that the grandmother would be stronger. Have you experienced that? Is that normal? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think as you were talking, I feel like a lot of times when I have these conversations around grief with other people, I think they're so surprised by the fact that it's different, right? Per relationship, per person. And that that not even that it's different, more that it doesn't look the same because they expect it to look the same for every single thing. Right. And I think that, there are many people who lose grandparents who, for them, it is a relationship that was very distant. So it's hurtful, right? And you have that moment of pain, but it's not something that you're necessarily feeling on a day-to-day in a deep way.
Right.
And I think that the way I've always looked at grief in general is that it's about relationships, right? It's both the relationship you lose to whoever you have lost, but it's also the relationship to the versions of yourself that you were with that person. Because every single person only knew you in that specific light, right? So for me, for instance, like I've lost my mom when I was 10 and then my grandmother when I was 21. And I can tell you that the loss of my grandmother always hits different. Because she was with me through so many different chapters of my life. Like I was 21, I was pretty much out of college, literally 2 months away from graduating when she passed away. And so I got to live so much more with her, and she got to know me as a baby, as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult in ways that my mom never did. So while I yearn a lot of times like missing my mom and wishing she would be around for certain things, I miss the idea of her having been there, but I don't miss her in essence, right? Because I don't know who she would have been to me as an adult. And so it's difficult to miss that kind of thing, right? And so for your example too, right? In someone else's eyes, it'd be like, well, you would miss your mom more than you would miss your grandmother, right? But that doesn't make sense for my life because of the way that it played out. And so I think when you're thinking about the comparison for you between Romeo and your grandmother, or for anyone kind of comparing griefs, like you never win with grief wars. Like everyone's grief is just what it is. And we get a lot more out of that experience, right? Of just healing and peace when we just kind of let it be what it is and address it as a unique experience. You know, I think grief in a dictionary has a single definition, but in life it doesn't. And it is very, very, very subjective to like who you are, what you're going through, the season of life you're in, right? You just got engaged, you're getting married. There are moments that you're looking forward to that like you guys had planned with him because he was such a big part of your family with your fiance. And so like that is something that is second to none of, that's just that experience and what it is.
Right. Wow. It was at the everyday, because it was like 24/7 versus my grandmother, you know, I could go sadly a couple days, couple weeks, especially during the pandemic. We never saw my grandmother because we wanted to protect her. And sadly, then she left us in December. Thank God not from COVID, but you know, I understand. I could see that how it's just the time spent also with.
Yeah. And the deepness of that relationship, right? Like there are many, many people who will tell you if they've lost a parent or something and say like, you know, I did lose my mom or I did lose my dad, but I had no relationship there. So it hits different. And it's not as something that as I would mourn if it was something that I saw them every day or if I had that deep relationship. It's complicated. Relationships are complicated. But I think when you think about a pet especially, oh my gosh, like so I have a dog with my boyfriend, Chauncey, but he's a year old. But my first dog is Mila, and she's 8 years old now. And she was my first pet ever. She's my uncle's dog now. But I look at her and like she had a really big surgery when she was 2 or 3 for her back. And she had a herniated disc. She had to relearn how to walk. She was paralyzed. And I remember that gut-wrenching feeling because it was maybe a year after my grandmother had passed away, not even. And she was going through a surgery and we were like, we don't know if she's going to make it through. She's so little. And I mean, that re-triggered so much grief that I had already inside of me. And this idea of this dog that I'm loving unconditionally and she's loving me unconditionally. Right. And how does that go? There's also lack of closure, right? Because you're like, you wish they could talk in those moments and you could be like, wait, I love you so much. Do you know that? And so I think that it's complicated and relationships are complicated, but the relationship a person has with their pets, I think is in many ways a deeper or a different level of deep than you would have with like your partner or your best friend, because it's just like this dog goes through everything. I remember Mila, when my grandmother died, I was laying on my bed and she just came and like put her whole entire face right on my face. And like was that for me. Yeah. And that for me was like, look, she knows. And like, I may not be able to break down in this way with the rest of my family, but like, she's got my back.
It's all energetic. That's why it's so special. There's no like judging. It's just pure energy. And, you know, besides like the shame of me admitting this, right? Because a lot of people, I'm just from outside, just, you know, I felt also jealousy, right? So I couldn't even see, like, for example, our brother has a German Shepherd. Now he's about a year old, Colonel. And I couldn't even go to my brother's house because I was like, I can't see another dog because I'm like jealous of this. Like you have and I was like, that's unique, different. I've never felt that. Is that part of grief too? Like I felt all these different emotions. I couldn't see people's photos with their dogs. Like so strange. Is that normal too?
Oh my gosh, it's 100% like normal. I think that's why I say like grief has such a like, I don't even know the definition in the dictionary, but it's so small, right? It's like a few words. Yeah. And it's like, you don't even, when you're living through it, grief is jealousy, grief is anger, grief is anxiety, grief is wanting to do every single thing on your like to-do list today because you don't want to, because like part of you is subconsciously just trying to push you through the day because you don't want to have to sit with it, right? Like grief is so many different things. It's a label for everything, especially when you're in that season. And jealousy is so much a part of that, right? Like we were talking about my mom earlier, because I didn't have much time with her when it came to mother-daughter dances or Mother's Day at school, or just the regular mention of a mom doing a thing with her kid, with their teenage kid or during the weekend that I never got the chance to. I was so jealous. And it was something that was so present in my life. And the kind of like you're saying, it was never talked about as this being a part of grief. And so sometimes you end up feeling, wait, am I a bad person? Because shouldn't I just be happy for this person that they're doing this thing? But it's it's your own personal journey, right? And like accepting that is also a really big part of the journey. It has nothing to do with the other person. It's wonderful that they're doing whatever they're doing with their lives on a given Sunday. But for you, it's like, okay, wait, my grief is manifesting as jealousy. Like, have I given myself enough room this week to grieve? Right? Like, have I given myself a container to put that in so that it doesn't manifest as jealousy? And it may as well still be that, but at least you're checking yourself and giving yourself space to be like, all right, well, this is what I'm feeling. So can I journal a little bit and get myself to a better place? Or can I not go to that thing where that person is going to be because it's going to make me feel that way? And maybe right now I just can't do that. Maybe I can do it in a month and I'll check in with myself then.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting so much from this conversation, and something that keeps on stirring up inside of me is actually an experience that I had, with Balto when I was younger. And this was like my soul connection dog, because I was obsessed with the story Balto, and he was a husky, and I was like, this is my Balto. And I was very young, and he died very tragically, like in front of us. And I will never forget that like sort of pain, right? And so what I have personally realized that I've done in my life, and I want to share this because I do think a lot of people this may happen to, I made a conscious choice to be close in my relationships, but there's always like that a little bit of closed off. So like, for instance, with
One foot in,
Donatella,
1 foot out.
Yes. And it's because I'm afraid of that grief part. And so I know that a lot of people do that in their lives as well. Like if you experience something that caused you a lot of pain, you'll close yourself off to not experience that closeness again. Because when the loss happens, because everything, right?
Has an end.
Everything always has an end. You don't want to go through that pain again. So what are your thoughts on this? When you experience grief, that fear to experience it again and doing everything in your power not to go through it again.
I think it's normal, that if anyone is going through that and they feel like, wait, I don't want to love again. I don't want to have another pet. I don't want to have another relationship that hits the same way because of the potential of what it can be. I think over time that you start with anyone's passing, you start seeing less of them as from like the perspective of their death. And eventually you start remembering more of their life. I think that transition does end up happening. For some people, it's super quick. For some people, it's not. Like for me, it took a really long time to be able to see that through the lens for my mom. Right. And I saw it a little bit faster with my grandmother. And like, it's different. But I know it can also pop up kind of like we were just saying with the general conversation around how do you spot these things, and is it grief, and is it manifesting in this way? It's the same thing. Like the more that you can be aware of it, the easier it is to figure out how to best navigate through it for yourself. Right. When we got Chauncey, I remember, and this isn't something I like openly talked about, but like I remember being so afraid those first few days because I was like, wait, like I remember Mila being this small, and she then ended up in surgery a year later, and like I was so afraid that I was going to lose her, and like now I have this other dog, and how do I like double my size of heart and have two puppies that I love so much? I'm like, what do these relationships look like? And knowing that Mila is like 8 years older than Chauncey, and like what is that dynamic for me and stuff. And that was hard, right? Because it brought up a lot of the same feelings around grief and loss and love that can manifest and be retriggered when something great is happening. Right? And I think that's another thing, having a sensitivity that grief doesn't just pop up when it's really sad things. It pops up when it's really happy things, right? Like we just moved again across the country, and that brought up a lot, right? Because it's like, oh wow, like I have another really nice apartment that I wish I could show my family or my mom and my grandmother, and I can't. And so kind of understanding how it ends up coming up for you is a really big way to just make sure you're checking in with yourself, right? Like I think everything now that you're saying is normal, right? And then it's your experience with grief, which is so wonderful because someone will take, everyone listening who has navigated some version of grief will be able to take at least 10% of it and be like, wait, that's how my experience of grief manifests. And that's what I've always found to be the most rewarding part of these conversations, is just that then you feel a little less alone in it, just as much as someone else does. And it also reminds you that everyone's is so different, because imagine if one person can only really relate to 1% of yours, what does the other 99% of their journey look like, right? And who is relating to that? And I think that that's where we can really see like how vast that definition is, and how you allow yourself to ultimately be okay with it looking a specific way if jealousy pops up, or if you want to love again and it's looking like this, and wait, I'm so scared, and knowing that someone else has also kind of been down that road.
Yeah.
So is that what you would say to someone right now that might feel really afraid of facing grief in their life?
Yeah, look around, and then also I think there's this really overwhelming feeling of what is grief, right? And so different people kind of navigate that in different ways. For me, especially specifically right after my losses, it was just a lot of writing and trying to listen to like what is my grief telling me, and where is it showing up, and how does it sound, right? And getting to know it from that perspective. And like sometimes that voice was ugly, right? Sometimes that voice was jealousy. Sometimes that voice was like a lot of really bad things. But I learned it more, and that just helped me figure out like, okay, wait, I don't have to be as scared of it as I feel like I should be, because I'm learning a little more. Other people are really like, let me read everything someone else has written so that I can see what pieces manifest for me. I read a book called The Anatomy of Grief by Dr. Dorothy Hollinger. So good. It was a recent read. And it was a more, probably for me in the last, I've read a lot of books in this space. And it was honestly one of the ones that I actually learned something from for the first time in a really long time. And it was this great kind of human version of this is how her grief manifested, but she's a actual scientist, right? So she like sees it from like so many different points of views, and like here's how animals are grieving, and here's how those things happen. And like knowing it from that point of view was actually really healing for me, because it took away not the emotion, but the judgment of like, if animals are naturally inclined to do it in this way, why am I judging my process? Because this is just the human, this is the normal, I am alive version of grieving. Whether I'm a human or an animal, this is how it manifests. So what am I judging that for instead of trying to understand it? So I think for someone who's going through it right now, it's kind of like thinking back to how do you navigate other hurt things? How do you learn about yourself in other ways, and trying to apply that to how you're grieving and finding comfort in that. But also knowing that, one of my favorite things, actually I'll share it with y'all because I can't remember right now, but I'd first heard it in a Netflix show that I was binge watching, and I can't remember the show. And then I also saw one of my friends who are also in the grief community post an Instagram post about it. But it's, people expect that over time, it's your grief that gets smaller, right? And it's like, they have like 3 mason jars, and each mason jar, like the first assumption is like the 3 in the top row are that grief ball is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But the bottom row of jars, another 3 one is like, this is what it actually looks like. And it's like that grief is the exact same. It's you as a jar that's growing bigger and stronger around it so that you know how to deal with it. But the grief is the exact same size, right? And I think that that's one way that gives you permission to know that like, it isn't the grief that's going to change, and that's okay. It's you. You're going to learn how to deal with it better. You're going to learn what works for you, and that'll make the next day easier.
I love that. That just brought me so much clarity and peace, because, it's true. It doesn't look the same for everybody. And I think just like expressing how I felt made me feel like, not weird. So I appreciate that. I would love to end with this in the sense that, how can we help those two that want to comfort those that are grieving, right? So I'll give you an example, like I would say the last 3 or 4 days, actually, no, I would say the week before Romeo passed, because I knew we were heading down that path, and I was just holding on as much as I could. I was really mean to Steph. Like Steph would literally call me just to check in because she knew. And I was just like, I would literally pick up the phone and say, what do you want, to her, literally. And I never do that. I was just like, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to work. I was just focused on him. And that was it. It's like nothing else in my world mattered. I mean, I know.
But I understood.
Right.
Yeah. But maybe there's people that don't understand and take it really personally.
Right. And I felt so bad for weeks after that. And I apologized a million times because I was like, that's not who I am, especially with Steph. Like how can people comfort those that are grieving?
So I think what Steph said was just really awesome, which is, I was like, I understood, right? Like, I think that it's two-sided, right? One is from like that person's perspective, you knowing that it isn't who you are in your normal days, but it may be who you are in the immediacy of losing someone. And that's okay. Because that's just, it's a traumatic moment of your life, right? You're not meant to be like at the tip top shape of your, like, let me be the most polite human I am. Like, no, like, I'm going through something really hard. And like, it isn't ideal to be mean to people, but it's also not, it's just a way that your grief is kind of projecting in that moment. Yeah. The important thing that you did too would just be like, hey, I know that I was mean and that was not cool. I'm sorry I did that. And I apologize. But also like apologize to yourself and forgive yourself for the fact that that's just how that had to be in that moment. And on Steph's perspective, I think it was awesome to be like, well, I know that, like, I understand, it's fine, because you can't take it really personally, right? Like if you're on the other person on the other side, it's really hard for you to you can't take it personally for the same exact reason that you know that this person, who they are on a day that isn't this worst day of their life, they're not this person. And so they're just going through something really hard, and no one is handed a guidebook on that moment. And so you're not like, here's all the ways that I should be doing it so that I can do it perfectly great and like have a bow around me. It's just like, I'm trying to like figure this out, and this is a lot, and it's overwhelming and it's overstimulating, and everything that comes with that. So I think that if you are a friend of someone who is losing someone right now, being patient is probably the best thing that you can do, and keep calling, right? I'm pretty sure that for as crappy as it felt to feel like you had to provide for Steph in a moment where you were barely providing for yourself, because even if her expectation wasn't for you to do that, she was just trying to be helpful, like in your mind, you're like, wait, what do you want from me? Because I can't give to anything else right now. Like the reality is that in a week later, when you kept on calling, she was like, wait, I could just call her right back. Right. And there's a comfort in that, and knowing that, you know, I'm going to keep on calling even though it's really hard, and you want to have that reminder. So if you're on the other side of that, just keep on calling. And if you're the person who's grieving, know that there's a lot of forgiveness in this process and a lot of apologies and acceptance that have to come with it. And the more that you can give yourself and other people that grace, the easier it is to not feel alone.
I love that.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so
for that.
much.
You brought me so much peace today. And I hope that, you know, our listeners as well, because no matter what it is that you're losing, it's still really hard. And the good news is it doesn't look the same for everybody. So that's good. You're not weird or different or should be embarrassed. And so I'm very grateful for you. You know how much you mean to the both of us. Yes. And I'm grateful for you. Thank you for bringing me peace today.
No, and thank you for opening up, because I think, like you said, you're going to touch so many people during this episode and this conversation, and
absolutely,
it'll also help you feel less alone, which I think is well worth it.
Grateful for you, friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you want to learn more about resources and tools that can help you along your grieving process, please follow Vivian Nunez at Viv Nunez on Instagram.
Subscribe and leave us a review on all of your favorite platforms. This helps us continue to bring you powerful conversations just like this to you every single week. And text us to the phone number below for subscriber-only freebies and perks to help you become the best version of yourself.
We encourage you to continue on with this conversation, keep being the strong, amazing woman that you are, and never forget to live inspired.
Until next time, MW.
Always love
Melissa
and Stephanie Carcache.